Yeah.
So here we are. Oh my goodness,
Yep.
folks, we are live. It has been a while, my friends. It has been a while, but I am Laura Mae Lindo. I am the MPP for Kitchener Centre, and I am joined today with Beisan Zubi. Beisan is the very new, very awesome federal candidate for the NDP in Kitchener Centre. Before we get started, I want to ground us with a land acknowledgement. And so I want everyone to know that I am hosting this conversation with my children in the background who just screamed. I think you could probably hear that. But anyway,
That's great.
I'm hosting this conversation in my home in Kitchener. This land has been held down, cared for, loved, and stewarded by the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Neutral people. We are on the Haldimand Tract. This is the dish with one spoon territory. There is one dish. That dish is filled with knowledge and wisdom and love and courage and resilience. There is one spoon. It is not a knife, my friends. It is one spoon, and we all partake in that wisdom and that knowledge. You can't do that without respect. You can't do that without being able to have some difficult conversations and look at the realities of our colonial past head on, and then choose to, with that wisdom, do things better. Now, I have been taught that our land acknowledgements should connect the reality of having conversations on stolen land with the conversation you're about to have, which is super cool because Bisan and I are here to talk about doing politics differently. And if there is
Yeah.
ever a community in the world that will help us to understand how important it is for us to change our ways, I would argue it's Indigenous communities across Turtle Island. They have seen what happens when we keep doing things in patriarchal ways, we keep doing things in violent ways, we keep doing things in ways that are not trauma informed. And they have provided us, graced us, and blessed us with other ways of doing things. And so, with that, I want to say, welcome, Bisan. How are you doing?
Thank you. I'm good. I'm good. And I was just thinking about the generosity of that too, of the sharing of that, of that knowledge. I love it. Love it.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful.
Beautiful.
So I've been thinking a lot because I've heard you in other spaces, in both your earlier run and in this run as well, and in times we've had little combos here and there, about the fact that you want to do politics differently, and that there's lived realities of who you are that will kind of push you to do politics differently. And so I've been reflecting a lot about that because we're in the midst of this federal election, and it's an opportunity for voters to choose a different way of doing politics as well. But one of the things that was interesting is that I started to ask, like, people would tell me I'm the first Black person to be elected federally or provincially in Waterloo Region, right? So either federal or provincial. And for those that are out there and are wondering, I am the provincial person. I am not in an election
Yeah,
right
we
now.
get that question
Yeah,
a lot. Laura
I am
Mae is
here.
provincial, federal. I would never she is running again. She had confirmed well before I was. Laura Mae is yours to keep. I would never. No, federal. So
Federal, but
different. Yeah.
I've asked my colleagues because they'll say to me, like, things are different here, the vibe is different here, whatever. So I've asked my colleagues, what is it that makes you say that? How is it different? And one of the things that my other MPPs around have said to me is that I bring up different kinds of questions at Queen's Park. And so I've got a magic fairy in the background who's going to help me to pull up an example of these kinds of different conversations that we have at Queen's Park. Zara, who's awesome, is in the back.
Next question, the member for Kitchener Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Premier. It is becoming increasingly clear that this government's pandemic response is leaving vulnerable Ontarians behind. A report from the Toronto Foundation has shown that COVID-19 is deepening the divide between the rich and poor along racialized lines, disproportionately impacting the lives of Black, Indigenous, and racialized Ontarians. Years of Liberal neglect and Conservative governments' failure to invest in these communities have left vulnerable Ontarians alone to navigate the impacts of COVID-19. Racialized communities are in crisis, and there are no targeted supports in sight from this government. We need a provincial strategy to address this deepening divide. Mr. Speaker, will the Premier commit to creating a provincial strategy to address the root causes of racism that have left racialized communities more vulnerable during this pandemic?
Thank you, Zara. Thank you for that. And so, Beisan, I wanted to give folks an example because it's been quite a while since we've been sitting at Queen's Park. But I'm curious. I want to throw it over to you. I know that on the federal side, there's been a real push to diversify the slate of candidates. I know that you're coming in with a different starting point altogether. Could you talk to us a little bit and tell folks what it is that you think your presence in Ottawa will do to influence the kinds of internal changes that have to happen to make magic happen?
Yeah, for sure. I also have a dog here, just as a caveat in case you hear any kind of loud noises. I think that exactly that, being able to come from a position of a lived experience, you see different sides to a question, you see different sides to a policy that somebody else might not see. And I like to kind of describe it as a big field, right? If knowledge and experience is this big field and everybody has their circle, how many circles overlap and how many circles kind of touch other areas of the field that aren't being touched, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm coming into this in the middle of the housing crisis as a renter. I was rent evicted from my home of 5 years just in January of this year. And I just saw it go back on the listing at double the price, double the rent in a 7-month period. And that to me is just like example right there. Hi. Just example right there of just, what's wrong? How's it going? And so, but you know what I mean? But being able to have that kind of question of knowing, well, this is what the lived experience is. And even with my kind of privilege, I found that process so traumatic. And so it was so difficult. And like, there were no resources. I was going to legal aid and they were just like, we can't, this is, you have to wait this much time and then you don't know where you're going to be and all this stuff. And so I was lucky. I had my parents to land with. But when people don't, what does that do? Right. So I think it just very much made the crisis real and present for me. But I mean, I'm also Palestinian, and this is the federal government that we're talking about. And Canada's foreign policy has been something that I have had a lot of kind of strong feelings about for a really long time. And I think that when the way that we're acting on, the global stage isn't in keeping with what we could be doing and the voice that we could be having for peace and for like a real kind of better responsibility and a better kind of position as a part of the global community, as one country of many, right? So I think that that's the federal kind of side that excites me as well, is speaking. I would actually be the only Palestinian woman like ever elected, I believe, to provincial or federal politics in Canada ever, because I mean, it's not like Palestinians aren't political. It's that the political system here hasn't been necessarily open to our, to our perspectives and like our lived experiences too, right?
And Beisan,
there's that as well.
That's really interesting. I want to talk to you for 2 seconds about both of those issues that you've raised, because we'll start with the idea of being Palestinian in this space that has not provided a space for you to speak that truth, or for Palestinian communities to speak that truth. Oftentimes when we're doing anti-racist work in community, you realize that not every racialized group is treated the same way. Injustice, oppression, discrimination, racism appears differently depending on who you are and what's happening on the global stage. And so having different voices can't just be, well, we've got one Black member, or we've got one, and we would say the same thing for women, right? Like one woman is not going to change the patriarchy.
No.
It might, but
I don't know that it will. I don't know that it will.
One really powerful woman that's got her networks is what's going to change that. And so
her networks, right? Like that's effective, right? Yeah. Still, and I really want to kind of, I only started realizing my own intersections and how that would work, and how my privilege and how my lack of privilege were both burdens and responsibilities at the same time. And that's just like an ongoing process for me. And I will be honest, I am still unlearning, and I am still processing and apologizing for making mistakes, because that discomfort is actually a kind of normal part of my existence in the world, right? Like I don't expect comfort when I walk into a room, and I haven't been necessarily always given it. And so that almost is something that we learn, and a skill that we can kind of keep for going into uncomfortable situations, but to affect change, right? To actually make things better and make things different, which is the goal, I think. You know what I mean? Not to just kind of go and be there and have our presence be the difference, but that we will act because we have the urgency behind us of having lived through these things. So,
and like change those systems. I wanted to also touch on the housing crisis, and it's interesting because lately I've been watching what's been happening in the world. We see this big housing crisis in the midst of a pandemic, et cetera, et cetera. We know that this is happening, but one of the interesting things that I'm finding in politics, both provincially and federally, is that people with different lived experiences, even like socioeconomic lived experiences, have had enough and are saying, I'm going to take this leap. I'm going in, right? Cover me. And when you were talking about being rent evicted, you and I were actually evicted at around the same time, because I also was a renter in Kitchener Centre for 4 years. And the weirdness of the housing market made the landlord decide they wanted to sell in the middle of the pandemic. And so I wasn't able to buy the house. And I decided, okay, well, I have to take a leap, but I'm a single mama with 3 kids. And again, these are not experiences that are like the norm inside political spaces. So assumptions are that I would be fine to find a house, that I would be fine to either buy or rent. I got priced out of Kitchener Centre. I literally could not find anything.
I know, and a lot of my friends are not able to even consider, like, we live here, we work here, we have, many of us have very good, like, careers and connections and longstanding connections, but when it comes to actually deciding on a place that we could even afford if we were trying to buy, this is not like an option to us. I was in the position a couple of years ago, right around when I decided to run regionally, that I actually was looking at houses. I had been saving up. I was in the position where my parents could also come in and help me, which was necessary for me to make, that. And I acknowledge that privilege completely. But even then, I knew I had like a hard cap, and that cap is just, that is gone. It doesn't exist anymore. Like a $80,000 home that's like a fixer-upper, the dream, it does not really materialize itself in this community anymore, which is so quickly changed from even 4 or 5 years ago. You know what I mean? That change is so dramatic. $200,000 in 1 year is not okay. That is actually a problem. And until we stop looking at it like it's like a circus act, you know what I mean? I think we look at it with almost like, oh, how bizarre. No, we are literally being priced out of our human right of housing. That is not bizarre. That is not, strange or unusual. It is a system that is working very hard against us, and it's just valuing profit. And so it's actually structured by the people who are in power to encourage us to look at housing as though it's a commodity and as though it should be profiting on. So when we talk about flipping houses, the fact that within a year you can purchase a home where people live and change its value so much that those people would never be able to afford to live in that home again, should be marked somewhere as a loss that has to be recovered, because we're just losing homes. That's all that's happening. And we're not building or replacing them. We're not taking the government is not taking its responsibility to make sure that for every home lost by a lack of regulation, a lack of actual initiative in the market, is a home that they actually have to be responsible for recovering. Because where is that family going to go? Where, you know what I mean? It's not like the houses or the apartments that are being built are appropriate for 3 children, for 3, it's not like you can put a growing family in the new apartments that are being built here, which is fine. There are a lot of single people, you know, fine is maybe doing a lot of heavy lifting. It is what it is, but we need to be thinking about what are we losing and how are we protecting people? Because I don't know, I think we've lost the thread on housing being a human right. Like if we agree, is that the fundamental principle? It's a human right. Well, then the way we would be approaching it would be fundamentally different.
Definitely. And I think that I want to show a second clip. So for a lot of people that don't know how the question period situation happens provincially or federally, the reality is that you have one question, the government answers, you get a follow-up question. And oftentimes in those follow-up questions, I'm also told that we're doing things differently. And part of that is because of the desire to make sure that the voices of the most marginalized and the most vulnerable in Kitchener Centre are brought to Queen's Park. And I want to share the clip, and then I'm going to put it over to you, Beisan, to talk about the local issues that you want to bring to the federal stage.
Speaker, and back to the Premier. The connection between structural racism and the pandemic is being recognized across Ontario. In 2011, under the Liberal government, public health planners in Kitchener warned that there were 5 neighbourhoods at risk of poor health outcomes due to high poverty rates, among other social factors. These neighbourhoods are highly racialized, and these are neighbourhoods where newcomers can afford to settle in Kitchener. Now, under the Conservatives, residents from these 5 neighbourhoods, a combined population of 85,000 people, have been hit harder by this pandemic than people living in more affluent parts of the region. Waterloo Record reporters call this disturbing. I call this structural racism. We need a coordinated provincial strategy to invest in, protect, and support racialized communities. So I will ask again, will the Premier commit to a provincial strategy to address the disproportionate impacts of COVID-19 on Black, Indigenous, and racialized Ontarians?
Yeah.
And so these are those moments, for me at least, these are the moments that that I'm going to keep with me no matter what happens in any upcoming elections, etc.
Yeah.
Because these are reports about the communities that are rarely discussed, reports about people that we forget in the midst of our day-to-day lives pre-pandemic, and during the pandemic, depending on who's in government, we're going to forget again. And so I throw it over to you, Beisan. What are some of those big issues, local issues, that you think are important to bring to the stage in Ottawa?
And like the federal provincial divide of responsibilities is kind of an interesting one as well, because you, Laura Mae, get to actually talk about the implementation of things, but where at the federal level, we're talking about the transfers and the principle of we should be sending more money for housing. We should be sending more money for healthcare. We need to have, you know, these systems given to the province so the province can actually effectuate it. So I think on the federal level, it really is about that working together to make sure that our provinces are able to deliver pharmacare, deliver real housing programs by receiving the transfers that they need from the federal government, who controls that money and who controls those priorities. So that's, I mean, one huge part of how that kind of local to federal perspective is really mirrored. But then I think about things like, you know, what we talked about earlier, the Haldeman Tract. Yep. The federal government is responsible for nation to nation negotiation with, you know, with Indigenous people. So that is the level of negotiation for settlement on treaties, outstanding justice that is still being, you know, bogged down in the courts, and as well as, you know, this land that we're on. And so coming to that place of truth is actually a really, you know, I think a critical part of a federal representative's role, because you have to be sitting at that table, one of those members of parliament, and actually advocating for decolonizing, because you're coming from the colonial system itself. And so if you're not in that system, understanding that, and trying to actually work to dismantle that inside of it as well as outside of it, of course, there's it's everywhere. But we need more people inside that system. And so that's also the where the caucus comes in, and where the solidarity across not just Kitchener Center, but with other communities that also want these things, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we can both build laterally as well as, you know, vertically, and really kind of build solidarity from those both of those ways. So, I mean, we know that Kitchener Center is like struggling, but we also know that we are we are feeling all of these issues
Mm-hmm.
really deeply here, really deeply in this space. So
I would add to that, Beisan, that we are in a community that seems, in the words of Beyonce, ready for that jelly. Yes, I did quote Beyonce.
I think they are ready for I
We're
think they're ready.
I
think we're ready for action, right?
Yeah.
I think we've been waiting and, you know, waiting for a long time. And now I think that, you know, we keep waiting. It's not going to delay what we have to do. It's just going to delay the end of the outcome, right? So the sooner we really start working on, you know, getting these changes in, the sooner those changes actually start being felt and being, you know, being implemented.
Well, listen, Beisan, thank you for that. And thank you to everybody for joining us and for putting little comments in the chats and all of that stuff. I promise I was reading some of the comments. I will reshare the video clips that I shared today along with the responses. But I want to end with a hopeful note. Yeah. And it's a real concrete example of something that happened right here in Waterloo Region. There was a fight for paid sick days. And there was pressure from the provincial government to not provide paid sick days in the middle of a pandemic. The pressure continues, but in that moment, we didn't have anything because the Conservatives had removed the paid sick days that the Liberals had thrown in at the last minute. And we were trying to encourage people to get vaccinated, but they couldn't take time off work. We've all heard the stories. A group on the ground, a group of community right here in Waterloo Region reached out and put stuff up, Ground Up Waterloo Region. They put out some stuff, right? They put some stuff out on social and they said, we need politicians to work together. Like, enough already of this nonsense that these people can't do this and that person can't do that. And you can't talk to the municipal people, can't talk to the feds, and the feds can't talk to no. And so I actually drafted a letter and we started to circulate it to get everybody else that were municipal and federal to join us in signing that letter. And while at the time we did not get any federal folks to choose to sign the letter, we did get municipal representatives to sign. Not everybody, but we had a running tally of all of these people that were signing on. And so imagine, just to the folks out there in Kitchener Center and beyond, imagine what would happen if we elected representatives who wanted to work across these jurisdictions. Imagine if we elected people that wanted to solve the problem first, as opposed to maintain the system that's been hurting people. And so with that, I want to say thank you, Beisan, for the courage to put your name forward. It is not easy. So thank you for doing it and doing it again. Thank you for all that you have brought to this conversation. I know that we're taking time away from your busy door knocking and getting out there, but
it's been great. It's been really great.
Well, listen, folks, that's it. We are gonna end our little live stream in this conversation, and I promise you, MPP Lindo will be back with more of these. Let's talk about, and then she'll make up stuff that we'll talk about. It'll be so much fun.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
No worries. Bye.
Bye.